wrestling is awesome, because it's not exactly above board. This we know, and if you didn't, what a way to find out. I'm sorry. However, because of that, you can come up with some truly bizarre scenarios and somehow get away with them under the banner of, well, just wrestling. At times, this does mean people get too carried away, however, and want to see just where the line is. There's without a doubt a point that shouldn't be overstepped, and yet that hasn't stopped promoters throughout the years from ignoring that and hurling such nonsense at fans, we stop and question if we're all on drugs. We're not, but it's just wrestling. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, and this is the 10 most surreal WWE matches ever. Number 10, Donald Trump vs Rosie O'Donnell. On the 8th of January 2007 episode of Raw, there was some real life beef between Donald Trump and Rosie O'Donnell, and Vince McMahon found out about it. Because of this, we had to sit there and see two impersonators duke it out in the ring to settle their differences. It was utterly mad. It started with the pair trading barbs, or more specifically, Rosie telling us basically that she was overweight. And if you wonder why that happened, it's because McMahon and Trump are friends. Maybe, potentially, but who knows. Throughout all this, Donald played with his hair as Rosie continued to do things associated with her size. And in case you don't know, this would never happen today, and it shouldn't have happened then. The ending even parodied Hogan Andre from WrestleMania 3, and in many ways, this ruined our lives forever. Number 9, John Cena vs Brock Lesnar. Extreme Rules 2012 was surreal for many reasons. Number 1, Brock Lesnar was back in the WWE ring, something no one saw coming the months before. He'd walked out of the company years prior and had gone into even bigger things with the UFC. Money talks, however, and he returned to absolutely muller John Cena to such a degree that the blood flowed like wine. That would have been one thing if it had been with anyone else, but this was the main guy in the entire place. Lesnar didn't care and even licked some of John's juice, which sounds very, very weird. I meant blood, but I'd already used blood once, so I wanted to come up with another word. Forgive me. If this wasn't a huge surprise, it was even more bizarre when everything was said and done. Despite barely doing anything but get destroyed from start to finish, Cena won at the 18-minute mark, leaving everyone confused. This should have been the start of the Brock we eventually got, but instead, it was just a long journey to restore the same damn status quo. Number 8, Bret Hart vs Vince McMahon. The long-running feud between Bret Hart and Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 26 could have been okay. But it wasn't. Aside from feeling the need to add in even more story to one of the most fascinating real-life tales in history, the way the match was booked was awful, going far too long and exposing the Hitman far more than was needed. This wasn't Hart's fault either. To say he'd been through the wars would have been an understatement, and yet here we went 11 minutes. 5 would have been fine. It was mostly just Bret hitting Vince with a chair too. There were some shenanigans with the rest of the Hart clan, but it was nuts to see this actually happening in front of our eyes. It just didn't make sense. If nothing else, it was unbelievable that Bret was actually back in the WWE ring and beating McMahon up as well. Think of that back in 1997. It's unthinkable. Number 7, the Toxic Turtles vs Ron Preston and Tommy Stevenson. Wrestling Challenge, March 9th, 1993. Welcome the Toxic Turtles. And yes, I said turtles, and yes, they were a rip-off of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as well. Where else but wrestling, right? Now, to be fair, the idea wasn't as dumb as it first seemed because, let's face it, Vince McMahon loves a lot of dumb stuff. He had a man dress up as a giant turkey, let's not forget. It was awful, of course, and the fans were not into it at all. Just to try and add to the hilarity of the situation, one of the turtles started to do a dance, but when he found himself on his back, he couldn't get up because of his shell. It was embarrassing, and it got so bad eventually the pair just pretended they weren't turtles at all and got through the match as quickly as they could. But just think about this. 2 grown men dressed up as turtles trying to win a pre-planned fight. Yep. Number 6, Goldberg vs Lesnar. No one predicted what was going to happen at Survivor Series 2016, and if you did, you're a massive liar. The sight of Goldberg beating Lesnar, the protected warrior, in just 1 minute 26 was unreal, and it shocked everyone both at the time and for days after. The news spread like wildfire. A lot of the reaction was, of course, rage. Why had we just wasted a 2-year dominating streak on a veteran part-timer? And what on earth was the future? Had Vince McMahon gone nuts? Was this the end of the world? Should we all kill ourselves? No, we shouldn't, because it all worked out okay. It was surreal to see this though, as these kind of things just don't happen, especially in WWE, but it did. In many ways, it's the highlight of the whole year, and it didn't really hurt Brock at all when it all came to its conclusion. So I guess they all did a good job. Number 5, The Undertaker vs Mankind. The Attitude Era was known for how violent its action was, with tables being broken nightly and blood being about as common as a punch to the face. At King of the Ring 1998, however, the idea was about to change forever. For all the disparaging comments about wrestling being fake, when The Undertaker threw Mankind from the top of the cell, it could have legitimately killed him. There was no way to know how such a bump would end, and the risk here was like nothing else, a fact even more true when you see how close Foley's head was to all manner of objects suplex once he landed. This was suicidal backyard wrestling performed on the grandest and most glamorous stage, and somehow, Mankind kept getting back up. It was like taking in a blockbuster sequel the very second before you left your cinema seat and you were given a bunch of free popcorn. This remains the most harrowing, violent and disturbing match Mick Foley ever wrestled, and this is a man who dealt with exploding barbed wire and time bombs. Number 4, The Undertaker vs. the Dudley Boys. Vince McMahon must have been desperate. No, not to be too fond of tag team wrestling, he still greenlit a handicap doubles bout as the main event of the Great American Bash 2004. That wasn't enough though, as we were also given the Concrete Crypt. Straight away, you know this is nonsense. Essentially, the story went thusly. If Undertaker didn't do the right thing and accept Paul Heyman's demands to lay down to the Dudleys, Paul Bearer would be killed with cement. This right thing was somehow teased as a mystery in the weeks leading up to the Bash, and it was so corny as Bearer's stuff was clearly pre-filmed, rendering it all the more preposterous. The match was also rubbish, so you'd think the cuts to Heyman, with his hand on the lever of the cement mixer, would represent a welcome diversion. They didn't, and to be fair, this was probably the worst promo work of Heyman's career. After beating the Dudleys, Taker decided to murder Bearer anyway after scaring Heyman off with a lightning bolt. Amazingly, this wasn't even a heel turn. And yes, I just talked about murder and lightning bolts in the same sentence. Number 3, Kurt Angle, Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins versus The Miz, The Bar, Kane and Braun Strowman. The Roman Reigns detractor was sort of proved right at TLC 2017. The very second he left for a short enforced spell, WWE turned into this bizarro land of Match of the Year contenders and impossible comebacks that were as sudden as they were glorious. For example, the sight of Kurt Angle in full Shield gear pretending to be Roman Reigns by shouting like him remains beautifully absurd. Angle wasn't meant to make it back to the WWE at all given all of his troubles, but he did, having conquered yet another battle to get there. Even if he did return, he wasn't meant to wrestle, and with what seemed like an hour all of this had come true, the fallout was crazy. Angle was power slammed through a table by Braun Strowman, who was then killed off in a trash compactor by Kane, who was running for mayor, which allowed a reconciled Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose a faint chance of defeating Sheamus, Miz and Cesaro. So in short, Angle's triumphant return to the fray was a brilliant wrinkle to what was literally a stupidly good match. Number 2, Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock versus Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. 6 days from WrestleMania 18, we got this match on the March 11th, 2002 episode of Raw. Now that's all over the place anyway, but it's also indicative of what the NWO had already become in the WWE. Shills of their former selves. It probably could have been a main event on some pay-per-view, but instead we were just given this for some reason and got to see the stars of the Monday Night Wars just having a fight on a random Monday night. I mean, it wasn't any good, and some of the encounters between the major players were horrendous, but that just tied into the bigger story here, or potentially did. Hogan refused to sell for Austin, and you could say it was down to the fact that one Stone Cold had outwardly said he didn't want to work with the Hulkster at Mania that year. None of this made any sense anyway, and the level of quality just pushed it lower still. Number 1, Vince McMahon versus Stephanie McMahon. I think a lot of us have forgotten about this, but at No Mercy 2003, father and daughter squared off in what was meant to be a grudge match. Which means we were meant to assume Vince was going to try and mangle his own flesh and blood. Right. It started so strangely too. Stephanie, concerned with her mother Linda, who was outside the ring, left herself open to be smacked by Vince with a brutal forearm. McMahon then started screaming, "You like that?" with all its unsettling connotations as he threw his daughter around the ring. It was surreal then, and the sight of Stephanie McMahon selling enthusiastically is still surreal now. Mr. McMahon cannot call himself a father, wins Michael Cole on commentary, but he is a promoter, and that's what this was all about. And there was that moment where Vince McMahon begged for mercy before revealing that it was all a fake out. This was carnies at their best. Hello WhatCulture, my name is Simon Miller, and today I have an announcement so big, so huge, it's gonna shatter the very foundations of your life to the point you may need to phone up a friend and say, "I don't even know who I am anymore. I have just heard the news. Have you heard the news?" I've heard you out there. I've seen you've been commenting. I've read your tweets. And I can now officially let you know that if you do enjoy Raw ups and downs, if you do enjoy SmackDown ups and downs, that now you'll be able to set your watches to them. You'll be able to make notes in your calendars because we're gonna have an official time for when they're gonna go live. I know, massive. So Ups and Downs for Raw will go live at 2 p.m. GMT, that's British time every Tuesday, and they will go live at 2 p.m. GMT every Wednesday for SmackDown. So you don't have to be aimlessly walking around anymore going, what do? I want to know what got up and what got down and what Seth Rollins did or what AJ Styles is up to. Now you know, 2 p.m. GMT Tuesday, 2 p.m. GMT Wednesdays, Ups and Downs coming at you in the face. I realise what I just said, retract that, keep moving on, and I hope to see you there soon. And I hope that we build an audience so big that if I ever wanted to march an army anywhere in the world, I could, and we'd call it the Ups and Downs Army
because they haven't come up with a better name.